When you think about Nav's music, what comes to your mind? For me, I think about his first couple of albums and mixtapes and how I liked a lot of his earlier projects, like his mixtape The Introduction that was released on SoundCloud in 2016. It was a different vibe compared to a lot of the albums that came out around this time. It was more depressive music and laid back, and it's really different from his newest album, Demons Protected by Angels, which is faster line delivery and more upbeat. The Introduction was one of his better projects that was released way before even getting his foot in the door in the music industry, which could be considered troubling for most artists. The only other really good album I could think of is Bad Habits that debuted at #1 on the US Billboard 200. For the past couple of years, there's been a growing notion that Nav's music isn't really good and it relies too much on really good beats and features, but Nav himself fails to deliver on lyrics, tone, and delivery, which could take an average album into legendary status. Today on the channel, we're going to talk about why the music industry hates Nav and what he has done with the criticism he's received from his viewers and listeners over the years.
While y'all was suffering from future shock, hurting and hating, waiting for that other shoe to drop, I was relocating this whole operation to the top.
Now, at Nav's current age of 33 years old, he has been in the music industry or associated within the music industry for many years. Starting off uploading his music to SoundCloud, Nav at first never really expected or even thought his music would head anywhere, and was more focused on creating beats well before he even thought about hopping on a track to rap. Nav was so focused on just creating and producing beats that his name used to be Beats by Nav before taking off the beginning part of his name in 2016. 2015 was a crazy year for Nav. Not only was he creating beats for a lot of artists at that time, but he'd also worked with Drake on his song called Back to Back. It was a diss track directed at Meek Mill. Nav helped with the production of that track and it was later released. And at first, Nav had no idea that it would eventually turn out to be that diss track by Drake aimed at Meek Mill. This was also the same year when Nav released his very first track on SoundCloud called Take Me Simple, which was released on September 25th of 2015. This track accumulated over 18 million views within the last 7 years, which is huge for an artist who no one really heard about before that point. 2016 was the start of Nav's big breakout. In January of 2016, right at the start of the new year, Nav uploaded his song called Myself. Without even realizing it, he just released one of his best songs he ever created. This was further validated after Kylie Jenner posted an Instagram story with his song playing in the background. And just like with Ayo and Teo getting shouted out by big celebrities and boosting their online presence because of that said celebrity shouting them out, the same thing happened with Nav, who would also triple his plays on SoundCloud after that shout out from Kylie Jenner. But again, this was only the start for Nav. That year, he'd get signed to EXO, and he'd also be featured on a track with Travis Scott called Beebs in the Trap, a track that Nav also helped produce and was released in September of 2016, with the music video being uploaded to YouTube on December 28th, right at the end of that year. That video generated over 154 million views on YouTube and put Nav into the spotlight. After this music video with Travis Scott, it was off to the races for Nav. In 2017, he released his highly anticipated mixtape titled Nav, which featured some of his already released music and a song called Some Way featuring The Weeknd, where The Weeknd sends shots at Justin Bieber, which generated buzz around that track and around the whole mixtape. I had problems with this mixtape. I really enjoyed a lot of Nav's earlier work, and he put a lot of those songs onto this mixtape, but kept out a lot of the songs that his fans liked, like Fell in Love, Take Me Simple, and The Man, which were arguably better tracks than the ones he released with this mixtape. As a fan of Nav, I did enjoy this mixtape, but I found myself listening to other songs that were left off of this project and eventually stopped listening to these songs altogether just a couple weeks after this project debuted. But after this mixtape was released, Nav faced backlash. Nav said the N-word repeatedly throughout this project, and people took issue with it because he's not black. Nav went on Genius to talk about the controversy and gave his side of the story and the reason why he said it so freely without care. During the interview, he said this: "Well, it's like the neighborhood I grew up in is very multicultural. It goes from Chinese to white to black to Jamaican, everything, right? Everybody uses that word freely. A Chinese guy is saying it to me, I'm saying it to a black guy saying it to me. It's all like that. I was making music for me and my friends in the beginning, so I didn't really think anything of it. But once I got to the global level and started seeing a little bit of backlash, I totally cut it out. I respect it. In my neighborhood, it's cool, but out here, it's not cool. So I just play by the rules. On Perfect Timing, you won't hear me say it once." Now in 2017, 2017, we saw Nav release 2 separate mixtapes, his aforementioned Nav mixtape and a mixtape that was produced by Metro Boomin called Perfect Timing, which had some pretty negative reviews. People were anticipating a legendary collaboration between the two, but one delivered and the other one struggled to keep pace. Nav's autotune was the worst it's ever been on this project, and it actually seems like he's taken a step in the wrong direction. Usually in rap, there's a linear projection of growth, but in this project, Nav only speaks about women, drugs, chains, and clothing, and never steps out of his comfort zone to give the fans more of a realistic look into his life. And without gaining the bond with your fans, it's really hard to have your fans have your back. In the article from DJ Booth, it goes in on this project stating, "Not once on this project do we come close to ever actually learning about Nav as a person beyond constant reminders that he used to be broke and is now very rich." And the lyrics play out like a Mad Libs of 2017 rap cliches about drugs, sex, money, and having shooters on hand. While this criticism could be aimed at a larger number of popular artists not named Nav, it's magnified in Nav's case because he adds nothing as a vocalist. There is melody but no charisma whatsoever. Every line is delivered in the same emotionless tone and often the same flow. It's like if Siri made a rap album. And this has been the constant criticism leading up to the present day. In 2018, Nav got the bad news that he wouldn't get a spot on the XXL freshman list for that year, and this sent Nav into a rage on Twitter, tweeting, "I wouldn't show up for the freshman list. XXL, your magazine is trash. Sorry, I mean website." This rage would continue with the tweet saying, "To my fellow artists, we shouldn't look to a magazine for validation or to tell us if we hot or not, especially one that hasn't been credible for 10 years. At XXL, make music for yourself and your fans. I would never show up for the freshman list because I don't need their approval." This also led into a song titled Freshman List and a tour from Nav called the Freshman Tour. Now, there's not too many times in my life where I call the situation cringy, but that changes now. This song was not only cringy, but it also depicted Nav as being a whiny little kid throwing a tantrum because he wasn't selected for that list. And then he has the nerve to put it on his debut studio album. This leads me up to our next big milestone for Nav, and this was him releasing his debut studio album called Reckless, which ended up being his worst rated project to come out. And again, it seems like Nav just stays stagnant at this point and never really changed anything with his line delivery or flow, and kind of seems like he even does worse with this album, focusing again on a heavy use of autotune and features. In an interview after the album was released, he was self-aware of the issues with the album, stating that for the Reckless album, he acted as just a rapper on a beat, but that's not him, and he should have been more hands-on while making the album and with the beats. But even with the underwhelming release of his debut album, he'd still be nominated for 2 Juno Awards after this album came out. One for Fan Choice and one for Rap Recording of the Year. And before Reckless, he was nominated at the Juno Awards for Breakout Artist of the Year. After the album came out and right before Nav was about to release his second studio album, he had a sit-down interview with Pitchfork. During the interview, he states, "Honestly, I feel like I'm just now starting to get famous, but fame is something I want. It's a good problem to have. I'm still not there. When I walk out of Delilah in LA and TMZ will be standing out there with cameras and not even take a picture of me, I get sick. I get my Lambo truck right in front of them, all my jewelry on, and they don't even take one picture. But God willing, this album will change that, because if they're taking pics, it must mean my album went #1 and I'm getting more money." This was in response to the interviewer asking him if he would lose his fame if his next album flopped. But Nav would later say that was taken out of context, and sick in Canada is a good thing. But for me, in my opinion, I just don't know. He said, "I get sick," which doesn't seem to make sense if you're talking about something positive. And even when I tried to change it up a little bit, I still couldn't make it into like a positive thing. Right before Bad Habits was released, Nav joined Lil Uzi in leaving the industry. And while most fans were sad about Lil Uzi leaving, the same couldn't be said about Nav, with an overwhelming amount of people being happy that he was leaving the industry. But his departure from music wouldn't last that long. And in March of 2019, Nav released his second studio album called Bad Habits, which debuted at #1 on the US Billboard 200. And a couple days after that, he released the extended version. This album, in my opinion, was a lot better than his debut album. Maybe it was the features, but I also felt like his autotune wasn't as bad as his previous project, and was corrected in this album. Even though he still rapped about the same things on this album, he did show a different side of him with his song called Why You Crying Mama, where he talks about his mom, but it just ends up with him again talking about his wealth and how he was broke, but still a little deeper into his personal life than what we got in the past. In 2020, Nav released 2 projects, one being titled Good Intentions, which was his third studio album that also debuted at #1 for the US Billboard 200, and the other project was a mixtape collaboration with Wheezy called Emergency Tsunami. Both of these projects were a little underwhelming in my opinion. Not only did Good Intentions sound pretty much like Bad Habits, but the first half of the album was in Anthony Fantano's voice, not good. When it released with the Brown Boy 2, I enjoyed those songs, but as of today, I find myself trying to avoid that album at all costs. Emergency Tsunami was decent, I guess. I liked a couple songs from that mixtape, but again, nothing that we haven't seen from Nav already. The features were good, but his lyrics just haven't improved from his last album. Leading up to 2022, he recently released his newest album called Demons Protected by Angels, and to be completely honest, I listened to one track and it didn't pique my interest, which is really upsetting because I've been a huge fan of Nav through all the hate he had received in the past. A lot of the hate and criticism is valid and is centered around Nav's inability to produce a hit without having a feature. Not only that, but how he delivers his lyrics and his tone of voice while doing so. But Nav has failed to work on himself to fix those issues. Instead, he blames his appearance as a reason why he gets so much hate within the music industry, and during a sit-down interview with Complex, he would say this. Nav said, "The way I look, bro, that's gotta be it. They're just tight. Yo, bro, if I was some light-skinned dude with tattoos, the whole look, NBA 2K player looking type of dude, bro, and I saw me getting more money and having more fun and getting more bitches and clout and whatever, I'd hate me too." Sadly, there probably are people out there in the world that don't like Nav because of the way he looks, but the majority of the critics point out his flaws within his work, excluding his appearance. But that's his scapegoat, and it's validating for him to blame his misfortune on his appearance and how people view him instead of how he hasn't improved as a rapper over the past 7 years. This is the main reason why people in the industry don't like Nav, because instead of changing his flow or working on new ways to deliver his lyrics, he instead blames racism within the industry and continues to rap the same way he has been rapping for almost 5 years. Maybe racism is mixed in with that, but with every new Reddit post I come across, they all point out how Nav is boring and generic, and that's the reason why he gets hate. But that's just my take on everything and why I feel like the music industry doesn't really mess with Nav anymore. But why do you feel like Nav has gotten so much hate over the past couple of years? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any content creators that you'd like me to look at, the best way to do so is by sending them to me through my Instagram DMs or on my Discord server, which will both be linked in the comments below. Along with those two links, I'll also add a link to my second channel for more content. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Had Advil edit the video and came out really good, and in the matter of 3 days it hit 100,000 views, and it was really shaping up to be a great video. But then I look into my Instagram DMs probably the following day, or no, I think it was a couple hours after actually, and Pretty Boy Fredo sent me a message, and the message goes, "I understand you